The Mexican-American War is certainly one of the least studied wars in American history. It took place between the American Revolution and the Civil War, and it sort of gets lost in history books. But here out west, there are actually a lot of signs of that event, and today we're going to be exploring one of the battlefields from the Mexican-American War. The Mexican-American War was fought between 1846 and 1848, and of course it was as controversial then as it is today. In 1845, the United States annexed Texas, though its southern border remained disputed, and in an attempt to gain not only portions of Texas, but much of the modern-day southwest of the United States, President James Polk convinced Congress to declare a war on Mexico on May 13, 1846, after U.S. forces were internally sent into disputed territory and repelled by Mexican forces. Thus, the United States was at war with Mexico with the purpose of acquiring more territory. The war was fought in Mexico and modern-day states of Texas, New Mexico, and California. And as mentioned, today I'm in Southern California checking out one of those battlefields, known as the Battle of San Pasqual. In the fall of 1846, General Stephen Kearny and a military force were ordered west from Missouri with the task of seizing territory, to include California, and conciliate the local inhabitants to the United States. While in New Mexico, Kearny was ordered to take command of all American forces in California. Upon learning that Commodore Robert F. Stockton had seized much of California, Kearny sent most of his force back east and kept only around 100 men from companies C and K of the 1st Dragoons. Famous Westerner Kit Carson guided Kearny's force to Warner's Ranch in California, where they arrived on December 2, 1846. On December 5th, Captain Archibald Gillespie and 39 Marines from San Diego met General Kearny and his force with the request for them to confront enemy forces in the region under command of Captain Jose Flores. Amidst the troop movements out of San Diego, Captain Andres Pico, brother to Pio Pico, the last Mexican governor of California, led a force of around 80 Mexicans, known as Californios, to track the Americans. Kearny's camp suspected the enemy force, and after a scouting mission, both sides were aware of the other's presence. Battle was near. Just after midnight on December 6th, Kearny ordered his men forward to carry out an immediate attack, despite rain and poor mounts. The Americans lost the element of surprise, but yearned for combat after months of marching and suffering. In the initial action, darkness and fog sparked confusion, which led to the American horsemen to be separated. A misunderstood order resulted in 40 of the best mounted Americans to push far forward, away from the main body. Pico and his Californios took advantage of their knowledge of the terrain and went on the attack. The rain made the American carbines almost useless, while the Californios fought effectively with lances and a few firearms. The battle quickly devolved to hand-to-hand fighting. Much of this fighting took place near Kumeyaay village, where U.S. Army Captain Abraham Johnston was shot and killed. Amidst the melee, many men were killed and others wounded, to include General Kearny. Rain, stubborn mules, and short sabers plagued the Americans, who were overmatched by the Californios and their long lances. One American howitzer was captured while the second was finally unlimbered and brought to action. Either the eruption of canister shot or the rapid escalation of hostilities led to Pico's withdrawal of his Californio forces. The next day, Captain Turner led the Americans, to include the wounded Kearny and the others, on towards the coast. However, they were blocked by Californios near Mule Hill. On the night of December 8th, Navy Lieutenant Edward F. Beale and Kit Carson volunteered to sneak through the Californio lines with an Indian guide and proceed to San Diego to request reinforcements. Eventually, around 200 American sailors and Marines reached Kearny's beleaguered force, and the Californios were dispersed. The exhausted Americans finally reached the safety of San Diego on December 12th. Dr. John Griffin, General Kearny's personal surgeon, reported 17 Americans killed and 18 wounded. Oral tradition from the Kumeyaay people say that American losses would have been far worse if it wasn't for their help. Pico's Californios had 2 men killed and 18 wounded. The Battle of San Pasqual was the worst defeat suffered by the Americans during the Mexican-American War. Back here is a visitor center, and actually this park, it's a state park, It's actually closed right now for refurbishment and maintenance, which, I mean, you can just kind of see how overgrown everything is. But there is a visitor center here that will be open again at some point, and I do know they have some artifacts on display there related to the battle that are pretty neat. Just outside the museum, and I saw this bronze tablet that reads, "Under this tree, Leonardo Cota and Jose Alpaz planned the Battle of San Pasqual in 1846. And the small sign next to it says that this bronze plaque was actually originally mounted on a granite marker under a large sycamore tree on Camp Pendleton Marine Corps Base in 1942. And the camp is located on the site of Rancho Santa Margarita y las Flores, which was a Mexican land grant to Pio and Andres Pico. So it's pretty interesting. Obviously, the monument's not there on Camp Pendleton any longer, but they did bring this tablet here to place on the wall outside of the visitor center. So the battlefield itself, the battlefield for San Pasqual, is kind of taken up by this whole area just east of the San Diego Safari Park near Escondido, California. And today, you know, it's not like a distinct field you can necessarily walk through. A lot of it took place in this valley before us. The American forces were generally up in this area where I'm standing, up in the hills. But a lot of the fighting would have taken place just down there in the valley where you see that road passing through. There is one interpretive sign here. It's quite faded, maybe one of the projects they're working on, but it says that this is an historic battle. California's bloodiest skirmish of the Mexican-American War was fought in the valley below in the pre-dawn darkness of December 6, 1846. It was here that General S.W. Kearny led United States soldiers against Captain A. Picos Californios in the Battle of San Pasqual. Although the U.S. lost more soldiers, both sides claimed victory. And Kumeyaay oral traditions say that American losses would have been greater without their help. And again, another reminder, being in Southern California, most of these lands have been occupied by Native Americans for hundreds of years in some cases, and this is no different here in the valley. It goes back to sort of a complicated but mixed cultural history of Southern California, where you had the Spanish in Mexico and the influence that fled over here, the Mexican side, Native American side, American pioneers and settlers, and it was quite a mix. And of course, it often led to conflicts, whereas the Mexican-American War was more of a land grab by the United States. You know, it still saw that all these cultures colliding and all these different people coming together in both peace and in war. And it really is fascinating because, you know, you're just driving around, you don't realize some of the events that have happened around you, wherever you might live in the United States. And I think so many folks get used to a lot of the major battles and battlefields that took place on the East Coast, which are all incredible to explore. But here on the West Coast and here in Southern California, there really are a lot of neat historic sites, to include some battlefields to check out. And tucked away back here is actually the entrance to a series of trails that cuts through some of the small hills here around the battlefield. And all this is part of the San Pasqual Battlefield State Historic Park. And one pretty remarkable memorial that you will see as you go by these trails is the one just beyond us here. This towering monument near the beginning of the trails here at the state park is pretty fascinating, and it's actually depicting two men, two Americans. One is Edward F. Beale of the United States Navy, and the other is Kit Carson, the famous explorer of the West. And as the battle was raging over a series of days in December of 1846, these two men volunteered to sneak through the Mexican lines and proceed towards San Diego, where Stockton had a fleet, an American fleet stationed. And they were successful and able to crawl past, it says, 3 cordons of Mexican sentries in the night. And they hid in ravines during the day, traveled by night. And this is a depiction of them. It says, Beale and Carson hailing Stockton's flagship. So you can almost picture them on the shores of San Diego, waving a flag or a shirt or something to get the attention of the flagship of Commodore Stockton. And they were actually able to return with additional American forces and reinforcements to assist General Kearny and the men that were pinned down here in this valley. I'm here not far from the battlefield, or at least the visitor center there by the battlefield, and there's actually off the side of the road 2 monuments you can come see. Now, this first one here was dedicated in 1925, and it reads, "The state of California honors with this monument the American soldiers who, under the leadership of Brigadier General Stephen W. Kearny, Captain Abraham R. Johnston, Captain Benjamin D. Moore, Edward F. Beale, United States Navy, and Kit Carson, the scout, gave their lives in the battles of San Pasqual between the Americans and Mexicans, December 6th through 10th, 1846. I didn't notice this before, but behind the 1925 monument is actually this stone wall. And it looks like, I don't know if these are supposed to be benches or seats, like if it's meant to be a seating area, but I assume that this was probably also built in 1925 when this main monument was established. But this is a really cool feature. It looks like they used a lot of the rocks in the area to build this, and again, it kind of looks like chairs or benches. I'm just not sure what this would have been used for where it's at here, right along the side of the road. And off to the right, up this little trail, is actually a second monument, also a placard kind of built into a stone. And what I really like about this one is it was actually dedicated by the Daughters of the American Revolution. And it's just commemorated to the Battle of San Pasqual. And it was originally marked by the Daughters of the American Revolution of California in 1924. Another neat feature that I've noticed here is you have these stone walls, and this reminds me a lot of New England. Spending a lot of time in many years in New England, you get used to the old stone walls there. So it's really neat to be all the way out here on the West Coast and to see one of these old stone walls lining here in the field. I feel like this is kind of becoming sort of a running theme in my Southern California videos, but it's pretty darn hot out. The camera can barely take it, I can barely take it, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up my time here at the San Pasqual battlefield. And while it's not, you know, a traditional battlefield with a whole bunch of trails and cannons or other things, it is a pretty remarkable historic site. There is a series of trails that you can walk around up in kind of the hills where some of the Americans may have taken refuge and hidden out. You can look down and get the views of the valley where a lot of the fighting took place on December 6th, and really just kind of get a sense of the environment and the geography of what happened here at the San Pasqual battlefield. So again, California doesn't have a lot of battlefields to explore, and the Mexican-American War was really one of the only wars that directly touched it outside of some facets of the American Civil War, which we've talked about here on this channel. So if you can get out, come explore the San Pasqual battlefield. It's pretty fascinating. It's cool to actually come see the site, walk these lands, and kind of get a better idea of what it would have been like for both the Americans, the Californios, and the native people who lived in this area. Well, that's all for this one, folks. It's on to the next journey.